If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, this story is going to hit hard. Imagine sitting quietly in the corner of your family's ancestral cabin, while your brother-in-law stands in the center of the room celebrating a deal that could make him nearly $800,000. He's raising a glass of your late father's 20-year-old scotch, making renovation plans, talking about ripping out the walls, flipping the place by spring, and everyone is cheering. Your dad is proud. Your sister looks at her husband like he's a genius. And you're invisible. But here's the part they don't know. The cabin, the one they're planning to sell, it hasn't legally belonged to the family in 5 years. It belongs to you. And just as the celebration reaches its peak, your phone vibrates with a message from a stranger standing outside in the snow. Your brother-in-law owes me $18,000. That's when you realize, this isn't a celebration. It's the beginning of a collapse. And I didn't say a word. To the future, Tyler shouted, lifting a glass of my father's prized single malt toward the ceiling. The fire crackled in the stone fireplace, shadows flickering across the wooden beams of our old mountain cabin. Snow tapped softly against the windows. I got the final permits approved this morning, he announced proudly. We modernize everything: glass walls, heated floors, luxury finishes. By spring, we sell it and clear around $780,000. My father, David, clapped him on the back, smiling like he'd just found the answer to every financial worry he'd ever had. My sister Sarah looked at her husband with complete admiration. I stayed seated in the corner holding a cup of coffee that had long gone, cold, quiet, observing, because what Tyler didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the legal deed to this cabin was locked inside a fireproof safe in my apartment 3 hours away, and my name had been on it for 5 years. The celebration inside wasn't just excitement, it was relief. My father believed Tyler was transforming a stagnant asset into a profitable legacy. When he looked at Tyler's expensive suit and confident speeches, he saw leadership. When he looked at me, gray sweater, silent, analytical, he saw nothing special. Just Ashley, the quiet one, the accountant, the one without vision. My phone buzzed sharply against my leg. One vibration. I glanced at the screen discreetly. Unknown number. The message read, "Are you Ashley? My name is Antonio. I'm outside your cabin. Your brother-in-law owes me $18,000. My stomach tightened, but my expression didn't change. Years of forensic accounting had taught me one rule: never reveal what you know until the timing is right. I stood up calmly and stepped outside through the French doors. The cold mountain air hit my face instantly. Snow was falling harder now, thick flakes covering the porch in white silence. And standing near the driveway was a man I had never seen before. Everything Tyler had built his confidence on was about to crack. Snow was falling heavier now, swallowing the black pine forest in silence. I glanced back through the glass doors. Inside, my father was pouring Tyler another drink. Sarah was laughing, her hand resting proudly on her husband's arm. It looked like a perfect family portrait, except it was built on a lie. And standing there in the cold, I finally faced the question I had buried for years. Why? Why did my father always believe the loudest person in the room, instead of the one who quietly did the work? Families like ours fall into that trap all the time. We confuse confidence with competence. We mistake silence for insignificance. Tyler was a performer. He filled every space with energy, promises, and bold projections. He demanded attention, and because he demanded it, he received respect. I never demanded anything. I paid the bills quietly. I solved problems before anyone noticed them. I erased disasters before they became visible. And because I made it look easy, my father assumed there were no problems at all. He didn't value the stability I created. He valued the excitement Tyler sold. I looked down at my phone again. "I'm outside," I typed. Coming down. I wasn't just stepping into the snow to meet a contractor. I was stepping out of the role they had assigned me. The quiet daughter was done. The forensic accountant was clocking in. The next morning, I sat in a booth at the only diner in town, watching steam rise from a cup of black coffee. Antonio walked in 2 minutes late. He looked exhausted, nervous. He carried a thick manila folder under his arm. He didn't look like a scammer. He looked like a man who had extended credit to the wrong person. Without greeting me, he slid into the booth and pushed his phone across the table. He said he wanted an open concept. Antonio muttered. "So we started demolition yesterday." I looked at the screen, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The photo showed the great room, the original timber framing, the hand-shaped beams my mother used to trace with her fingertips while she read by the fire, gone, ripped out, stacked in a dumpster like scrap wood. Tyler hadn't renovated the cabin. He had gutted its heart. He erased decades of history to create something sleek and marketable. Something that would photograph well in a listing brochure. The anger I felt wasn't explosive. It was cold, controlled, precise. I reached into my bag and pulled out my own folder. Antonio, I said evenly, Tyler Collins does not own that cabin. He never has. I slid the deed across the chipped laminate table. The date stamp was from 5 years ago. I bought it. His eyes widened as he scanned the legal documents. When my mother passed away, my father stopped opening his mail. Grief paralyzed him. The bank was 3 weeks away from foreclosure. I paused. My sister and Tyler were busy living loudly. They never noticed the debt closing in, so I stepped in. I didn't tell him everything. I didn't tell him how I drained my entire savings account to cover the arrears, how I quietly transferred the title into my name to shield it from my father's creditors, how I allowed my father to continue believing it was still the family cabin because protecting his dignity mattered more than recognition. For 5 years, I had been the silent investor in their happiness, and this was my return. My brother-in-law tearing down my property to inflate his ego. He lied to you, I said calmly, and he destroyed my property. You're going to stop work immediately, and you're going to forward me every message, email, and voicemail he sent you. Antonio swallowed. He owes me $18,000, he said quietly. I met his eyes. He owes you more than that. Then I added, and he's about to find out the owner is home. The shift from defense to offense. I drove down the mountain with the evidence on the passenger seat. My mind had already shifted gears. This was no longer about protecting the cabin. It was about exposure. But before I made my move, I needed to speak to Sarah. She was the family optimist. Vision boards, affirmations, big dreams. I had to know, was she involved? Or was she just another believer in Tyler's performance? We met at a coffee shop near her house. She walked in glowing, a kind of bright, almost manic excitement that usually comes before impact. Can you believe this? She gushed, grabbing my hands across the table. Tyler says the pre-sale interest is incredible. We're going to be financially set. I studied her face, and I realized something. The higher the fantasy, the harder the fall, and I was about to drop the truth. Interest is insane, Sarah said breathlessly. We're going to be rich. Ashley, finally. I gently pulled my hands back. Sarah, listen to me. I went up to the cabin. I said carefully, Tyler isn't renovating it. He's destroying it. She waved her hand as if brushing away smoke. He's updating it. You have to break a few eggs, right? It's just old wood. It's not his wood to update, I replied, keeping my voice low. And it's not just the cabin. I spoke to the contractor. Tyler hasn't paid him. He's $18,000 behind. Her smile flickered just for a second, then hardened into something defensive. He's managing cash flow, she said sharply. These things are complicated. You wouldn't understand. You're always so rich. I understand he forged permits, I said evenly. And I understand he doesn't own the property. He's handling it, she snapped, her voice rising. Why can't you just be happy for us? Why do you always have to ruin things? Then she said the sentence that froze my blood. We took out a second mortgage on our house, she said, lifting her chin, just to bridge the gap until the cabin sells. Tyler said it was a sure thing. He said we needed skin in the game. I stared at her. She had put the roof over her children's heads on the line to fund renovations on a property I owned, based on promises from a man who couldn't even pay a contractor. Tyler hadn't just deceived a stranger. He had weaponized my sister's trust and turned it into a financial noose. He lied to you, I said quietly. You're just trying to sabotage us, she hissed, standing up. You've always been jealous of him. Stay out of our lives, Ashley. She walked out, leaving me alone with cold coffee and a truth I couldn't ignore. This wasn't about a cabin anymore. This was about stopping my sister from losing her home. The sister I grew up with was gone. Only the forensic accountant remained. The investigation. I didn't go home to cry. I went home to work. I sat at my dining table, opened my laptop, and logged into databases most people don't even know exist. Sarah thought I was jealous. My father thought I was passive. They were about to learn something important. Ashley, the accountant, wasn't a job title. It was a risk assessment. I started with a standard asset search. Tyler Collins. The results flooded my screen in red. It wasn't bad. It was catastrophic. Tyler didn't have a portfolio. He had a sinkhole. $57,600 in unsecured debt. Not mortgages. Not student loans. Credit cards maxed out. Online gambling losses. A luxury car lease he couldn't afford. 6 cards. Minimum payments. Constant balance transfers. He wasn't investing. He was drowning, and like every drowning person, he grabbed the nearest thing floating. My sister, that second mortgage wasn't a strategy. It was a life raft. He had burned through their home equity to plug holes elsewhere, and now he needed the cabin sale to happen fast. Before everything collapsed, I printed everything. A failed business, a lien, a bankruptcy filing years earlier, a clear pattern of financial destruction disguised as confidence. But financial recklessness alone wouldn't stop him immediately. To get law enforcement involved to remove him from my property before he caused more damage, I needed proof of intent, not incompetence. Crime. I grabbed my coat and keys. The digital audit was done. It was time for a physical inspection. Back to the cabin, I drove back up the mountain, tires crunching through fresh snow. The silence inside the car felt heavy, because the truth was clear now. My brother-in-law wasn't just irresponsible, he was predatory. The cabin was silent when I arrived. Antonio had followed my instructions perfectly. The job site was abandoned, tools gone, lights off. I stepped onto the porch and reached for the door, and that's when I saw it. The front door was unlocked. Tyler's confidence, apparently, didn't extend to basic security. I stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately. Sawdust, drywall dust, fresh destruction. The cabin looked like a war zone. Walls my mother and I had painted together were stripped down to bare studs. Floorboards were buried under debris and broken trim. But I didn't stop in the main room. I walked straight to the master bedroom, to the exact spot above the fireplace, where a large oil painting of the Rockies had hung for decades. The painting was on the floor, leaning against the wall, and behind it the wall safe, a small vintage steel box my grandfather had installed in the 1960s, wide open. I froze, my breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer, my boots echoing against the exposed subfloor. I looked inside, empty. The velvet pouches were gone. My mother's jewelry collection, the sapphire brooch she wore 2 weddings, the pearl strand passed down from her grandmother, the gold locket with my father's photo inside, gone, all of it. I leaned against the cold stone of the fireplace as nausea washed over me. This wasn't renovation fraud, this was felony theft. And as the forensic accountant in my brain took control, the psychology behind it became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't just about money. This was a narcissistic injury. Tyler didn't steal the jewelry because he needed cash. He stole it because he needed the costume of success. He couldn't tolerate being seen as ordinary. He couldn't survive the idea of being exposed as a failure. So he looted our past to finance his illusion. He pawned my mother's legacy to pay for champagne, designer suits, and contractor deposits. He chose crime over humility. He chose destruction over truth. He would rather burn my family to the ground than admit he was broke. This was the point of no return. He hadn't just crossed a legal line. He had violated a sanctuary. He had stolen the physical memory of my mother to feed his ego. I pulled out my phone and photographed the empty safe. Then I made the call. I need to report a burglary, I said, my voice steady and cold. And I know exactly who did it. The sister who hesitated at the coffee shop no longer existed. The woman standing in the ruins of her mother's bedroom was done negotiating. 2 hours later, snow was falling in sheets, forming a white curtain that isolated the cabin from the rest of the mountain. But inside, the lights were blazing. Tyler wasn't hiding. He was escalating. Through the window, I saw him pacing the great room, gesturing wildly. My father stood nearby, and with them, a stranger in an expensive suit, an investor, Tyler's last gamble. He was trying to sell a house he didn't own, to cover debts he couldn't pay, before the law caught up with him. It was the final move of a collapsing con, and this time I wasn't watching from the corner. I was about to walk in with the truth. It was the desperate spin of a roulette wheel. I didn't knock. I used my key, the one that had been on my keychain for 5 years, unnoticed by everyone. The door swung open, letting a blast of freezing wind tear through the room. The conversation died instantly. Tyler turned around, his confident smile flickering for half a second before he tried to recover. Ashley, perfect timing. We're just wrapping up. No, I said calmly, my voice slicing through the room. We're shutting this down. I stepped aside. Antonio walked in behind me, his face grim, and behind him, 2 uniformed officers from the county sheriff's department. The color drained from Tyler's face so fast it was almost frightening. What is this? He laughed nervously. A joke. This is an intervention, I said, walking toward the table where his fake blueprints were spread out. I dropped a thick file folder onto the wood. It landed with the dull, final sound of a gavel. This, I said, tapping the first document, is the deed to this property. Purchased 5 years ago, registered in my name. I flipped the page. These are the building permits you forged. The permit numbers belong to a parking garage in Denver. Then I placed the last papers on top, and these are pawnshop receipts, dated 3 days ago. I didn't need to say the rest. The silence was total. My father slowly picked up one of the receipts. His hands trembled as he read it. Then he looked at Tyler. The admiration in his eyes collapsed into something raw and unbearable. "You stole her jewelry," my father whispered. "To pay for what?" "For the appearance," I said quietly, because looking successful mattered more to him than being honest. Tyler broke. The confidence evaporated, leaving behind a frightened, desperate man. He turned to my sister. "Sarah, please," he begged. "Tell them it's a misunderstanding. I can fix this. I just need time." Sarah looked at him. Then she looked at me, and for the first time in her life, she didn't protect him. She stepped back. "Mr. Collins," one of the officers said, stepping forward, "you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and grand larceny." As the handcuffs closed, Tyler began shouting, blaming the market, the contractor, even me. But his voice faded as they led him into the snowstorm. Swallowed by the wind, the cabin was finally quiet. The glass castle was gone. 1 week later, the only sound in the cabin was the steady rasp of sandpaper. Antonio was carefully restoring the original timber beams, the ones Tyler tried to erase. The cabin smelled like cedar and sawdust, like healing. My father sat by the fire, smaller somehow. The illusion he'd lived under was gone. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I trusted him because he was loud. I ignored you because you were quiet. I thought you didn't care. I didn't offer comfort. I offered truth. If I hadn't bought this cabin 5 years ago," I said gently, "the bank would have taken it. If I hadn't stepped in last week, Sarah would have lost her home too." I met his eyes. "This is what the world looks like without the quiet ones." My silence wasn't absence. It was protection, I said. It was a shield. Tears traced the lines on his face. "I see you now, Ashley," he said. "I truly see you." Epilogue. That evening, I stood on the restored deck as the sun painted the snow in gold and violet. The jewelry was back in the safe, the one I paid to recover myself. Sarah had filed for divorce and was staying with me until she rebuilt her life. The cabin was secure. I wrapped my hands around a mug of hot coffee and breathed in the cold mountain air. Tyler wanted to flip this place for quick profit to prove how clever he was. Instead, he showed everyone exactly who he was. And I stopped him without raising my voice. I watched the first stars appear above the tree line. Sometimes, the quietest victories are the most complete.